かつて対馬の降ることを記した。こたびは人知れぬ戦いを語らん。残虐で恐ろしき変化が民を脅かしておる。助けを請う者の声に導かれ、クロードが冥府よりよみがえる。
Right after I completed the work on my previous video in which I talked about Rashomon, one of Akira Kurosawa's incredible films, there was a powerful feeling of nostalgia that made me come back to a video game quite close to my heart. The certain video game was the subject of my first video for this channel, and somehow I wanted to re-experience the game once more. To my surprise, I forgot the game had another mode that can make the game experience to be much more interesting and enriches the game experience in a more dynamic way. Ghost of Tsushima Legends is a co-op multiplayer mode released for Ghost of Tsushima. The mode was released as a free DLC in late 2020, and its story is totally detached by the main plot of the game. The story is narrated by a storyteller called Gyozen and tells the story of a group of 4 people called the Ghosts, who are fighting demons, Mongols and restless spirits in order to protect the island of Tsushima. The mode is based on Japanese mythology and tries to present a unique and a totally different experience compared with the main game. In other words, it can be said that Legends is a new game within another game, and I will try to explain that a little bit later. The way the mode is structured is quite easy to understand, but at the same time it is quite normal. When the player opens the Legends mode for the first time, it will see a cinematic that gives you the context of the mode. 4 warriors are facing a powerful evil force who threatens the island of Tsushima, and they will fight with everything in order to protect their homeland. As I said earlier, the mode is based on Japanese mythology, so the context and the faced enemies are mythical creatures like demons, spirits and possessed Mongols. The way the mode presents this context in a very horror-like scenario that is not quite scary but more intriguing, it makes the mode to be a very unique experience. From what I observed, yes, the mode presents contexts and ideas that could be scary, and those ideas could be a very interesting and a unique scenario for a game or a movie in its own way, but the way the mode is making the player to feel strong and unbeatable tones down a bit the horror atmosphere. What is a good idea for presenting such a context is how the narration helps to maintain the element of suspense. It gives a certain vibe while the player is experiencing the game, and it truly feels more dynamic than the main game. While Jin's journey is slow-paced in order to experience the story in a certain way and to feel the connection with the main character, Legends presents the context and allows the player to jump in any mission once. Whether the mission and the difficulty, the game lets you experience anything you want and lets you unlock the modes and missions in any order it suits you. I think it's not a secret anymore that I'm quite fond of the way the stories and the contexts are presented in a video game. And presenting a context like that made me quite interested in the way the mode is made. What I truly like is how the story is structured. There are 4 modes of gameplay in Legends. Each mode presents a number of missions that are connected between them thanks to the story. Each mission is narrated by Gyozen, giving the player the context of the mission, like for example, how the ghosts are facing a new type of enemy who is stronger and can be an obstacle in the greater context, or how an enemy is trying to control the souls of the deceased and the ghosts have to fight with those spirits in order to save them. All those small details make the mode to be fresh in a way. It makes the player take part in the story and integrate the player's actions in the mode more naturally than a simple context of go there and defeat those enemies. It makes the player's actions have a more important role somehow. From the point of view of the story, I quite like this approach. It is interesting in a way because if you take the stories of Legends and you transcend them into the main game, those are stories told by Gyozen to Jin. And probably it's just me, but somehow I had a familiar feeling when I played the story missions from Legends. Somehow, it looked to me that those stories are in a way Jin's actions against the Mongols, but combined with a lot of legends and myths, and they're told by the narrator. Probably it is just me or it is just a familiar setting for some missions, but somehow it gives these small sensations that the ghosts are somehow representing Jin and his allies. Or just Jin and each ghost represents one of his styles of combat. The mode can be accessed from the main menu or from the in-game menu, but the element that truly gives me the sensation of a story within a story is the chance to access Legends mode when the player meets Gyozen on the map. I don't know, probably it looks to me that way, but I love this idea to integrate a certain context that may look to be totally different from the original story, to be a part of the story as a legend told by a character to the main character. It gives a certain interest to the player to want to explore that mode, to see what that side character is talking about. Coming back to the main idea, the other missions from the other modes like Survival or Rivals feel just like some context battles that makes the player to fight alongside or to compete with other players, which make the missions to be more unique and interesting for a competition. But the raid missions are the ones who kinda conclude the story because you have to defeat the main villain of the mode. With all those contexts and interesting missions, Ghost of Tsushima Legends is giving a lot for the players of the main game to change the style of the game for a bit, if they got bored of Jin's journey, and to change the feeling a bit, but as a story, it clearly gives the sensation of a game within a game. Not because it's a mode for a bigger game, but because of that feeling the player might have when it will encounter Gyozen through the main game and listen to his story for a bit. Even though the context of the mode is memorable in its own style, due to the extreme use of mythical and magical elements into the mode, compared with a simpler and at the same time more realistic approach of magic and myths from the main story, there is a thing that truly, in my opinion, is the greatest diamond of Legends, and that's the gameplay. What I was surprised about was the ingenuity and the diversity of gameplay elements the mode presents, based on the mythological elements. Every single mission is unique somehow, it makes the player to be immersed a bit more into the game. But first things first, the way the mode is giving a special experience is by allowing the player to choose between 4 characters or classes. The player can choose to play with a samurai, a hunter, an assassin and a ronin. And yes, I said choose because depending on the way the player wants to play, there are 4 characters with unique abilities. Depending on the level of the items the player receives during the game, or chi as it is known, the player can have different equipment that can give a new sword style or a more interesting weapon that can take down more enemies like kunai or sticky bombs. There is a good thing the main mechanic of the game is the one from the main game, because the player gets easily familiar to the mechanics, but in a way, I find this choice of customization of sword style and weapons much more interesting. It becomes more specific to the way the player wants to play the game. In the main game, Jin has all those weapons, so it is up to the player to choose if they will use the weapons in combat or not. But in Legends, those choices are making the players to balance their team during the gameplay and make the game experience more dynamic. The chi levels allow the players to set certain difficulties for the missions and also to evolve their gear if it is necessary in order to play a mission on a harder mode. The difficulties of the missions are, in my opinion, quite balanced, to put it lightly, but if the player might try to play the game on a higher difficulty, for example Gold, and its chi is at the minimum limit of the difficulty, it can be a bit hard to go through the mission. It will require a bit of patience to know how to complete the mission. A thing that I truly like about Legends is the fact that you can play almost the entire mode alone. There are modes like Survival where you kinda need to play with other players, and I will not talk about the raid chapters where the requirement of a full squad of players is a must, but the missions and the Rivals mode can be experienced as a solo player as well. It is a bit boring, I'm not gonna lie, and from time to time it is quite frustrating, but if it happens for you to want to play Legends solo, you are not forced by the game to look for players all the time, but it will be difficult, or not depending on the chi level of the gear. The Legends mode gives you a lot of content to experience. You have a lot of customizable things for any of the characters that can be unlocked either by doing challenges in the mode or by unlocking them in the main game. When it comes to customizing your own style the character, the player has a great liberty, no doubt about that. but having all those elements of freedom regarding customizable stuff and how the game makes you interact with other players, there is something that makes the game to be challenging, and that in a good way. I want to talk about the enemies and the gimmicks of each level because somehow those elements make the game experience to be extremely interesting. The game presents different types of enemies that could present a difficulty during the gameplay, from enemies who restore health to their allies, to unseen enemies, to enemies who are connected by a spell and have to be defeated in a short period of time, or at the same time in order to beat them, to heavy and powerful Ori enemies who are quite hard to defeat. The game presents a lot of scenarios and challenges that make the game dynamic. Depending on the difficulty, those enemies will be in a larger number and it will make the game more difficult, but after all, it is expected to be a harder game. Depending on the type of the game session, there are different types of puzzles that sometimes could be fun or frustrating. For example, you have moments when some enemies have to be weakened with an extra spiritual bow in order to defeat them. Other times the player has to collect a certain godlike extra ability and defeat the enemies that are glowing the same color as the collected ability. Other times, in survival, there are waves of enemies that present an extra challenge, like throwing poison around them after they are defeated, or the players can revive their teammates much slower than usual. There are so many things that could be presented as a challenge in this mode that actually sometimes it kinda makes me think the mode is made in such a way to totally detach the player from the serious and artistic atmosphere of the main game to the fun, dynamic and challenging presentation of Legends. As for the challenges of Io, who are actually the raid from this mode, the challenges are made in such a way to be quite smart and quite unique. When I first tried the raid, I felt that whatever information I gathered that made me prepare for this game mode, it was in vain. The raid lets the player explore and discover how to progress into the story with quite interesting puzzles and challenges, but I really have to say that if you don't have a full squad, it is useless to try to do it on your own. The raid is the conclusion of the story, so naturally, the final chapter is the battle with Io, which is quite epic. It took me a while to understand and complete those missions, but seeing how the difficulty and the context progressed, I can safely say that it was worth it. It presented an epic battle, a complicated one, but it gives the player that sensation of satisfaction for completing the challenge. Even though the raid has some interesting mechanics unique to its style of missions, it is still something that makes the player stay for a while, understand its mechanics, and then proceed to complete an interesting puzzle. Overall, the entire mode of Legends is interesting. As I said earlier, compared with the original game, Ghost of Tsushima Legends is like the dynamic part of the game. It takes you as a player in a journey and in an experience that is quite interesting. Whether it is for the chance to play with your friends or want to have a more dynamic experience, or you just want to play a game with samurai in a horror context, I think this mode is a title that can be explored. I spend many hours in Legends mode. From time to time, it might look like a way to get away from the main story of the game and enjoy a short yet entertaining game session with your friends. For most of my gaming experience, I can honestly say that I am not fond of multiplayer video games. I am not that good at playing them and I do not have the time, yet somehow I quite enjoyed Ghost of Tsushima Legends. I felt the mode as being friendly with the player who doesn't have a multiplayer experience. It allows you to play the game either alone or with your friends. I found the mode to be easy to understand, and I am not talking as a player who previously played Ghost of Tsushima. Legends has a way to present its mechanics and secrets in a quick and simpler way to be understood by any type of the player, no matter its gaming experience. For those who want to try Legends and are not fond of the main game of Ghost of Tsushima, apparently the mode was released also as a standalone game, so it can be bought separately and experienced directly without going through the main game. This is up to anyone. In my opinion, I think the Legends mode of Ghost of Tsushima is worth a shot. It is different and more unique than the first game, but I think it can be a better experience if it is played alongside the main game. As I said, it can be a dynamic break from the more realistic and slow-paced experience of the main game, but at the same time, it can be a game that can be experienced when you might want to play a game with your friends. After all, the games are made to have fun and to detach you from whatever is getting boring. I think I will play this mode a little more, but I will come back pretty soon to the main game. A new adventure awaits back there, and I cannot wait to start and to discover the new chapter in Jin's journey.